All right, so today talking a little bit about pickets and making, and specifically what we call and know of nowadays as wrought iron spiked pickets, that classic look. Well, for starters, we no longer use wrought iron. It's very soft, malleable metal that was used to, warp, bend, twist, make cool shapes and objects back in the day. But nowadays, it's just going to be mild steel square tubing. Again, there's always exceptions, but I'm just going with mainstream commercial use. So right now, you see we have a 8x8 stack of 3/4 inch OD square tubing. That's what I mean by 8x8. It's 8 tall and 8 wide. That's how you can keep track of counting pickets, is that you would just do 8 times 8, so 64. We have 64 total of the pickets here, but that's going to go up because you can see how long this is. So I'm going to be cutting these into thirds, so it'll actually be 80-inch pickets. I got these all stacked up, and then what I did is I tapped the ends to be flush, semi-flush, as flush as you can get, within reason, as far as rubbing your finger across it, eyeballing it. And then I came down here to this end, and I tacked the edges, if you can see that. You can see the little tacks on there. And that's going to keep them in place. The clamp kind of helped me while I was tacking it, keep it in place. But anyway, so that's that kind of idea around cutting pickets in mass. You're going to stack up a square or a rectangle of square tubing. You're going to kind of get the front semi-square and flat with each other. You're going to tack up the back. And then you're going to strap the middle with like a strap. And you're going to pick it up on the table and then put it into this saw behind me right here, which is just a bandsaw. So ours isn't super big, but it's still big enough to do quite a bit. And here's a little roller table I fabbed up. And you're gonna just make sure that whatever you put on this roller table and getting put into this saw is level. So you're gonna put a level on it. Make sure that you're not cutting this way or this way, because the piece that you have set in saw, it isn't level. So just make sure it's level. Usually the backstop, we square the backstop of the bandsaw to the saw blade to make sure that the side to side is pretty square. Though it varies, it's still square enough, especially when you're doing pickets. You're not cutting across that big of a section on each individual picket, so you have more play there. So that's kind of how. From there, we're going to go to this machine, the iron worker. I think you have seen the iron worker before, like when I was doing the saddles. So we just changed the head of the iron worker. So it was pretty dope. We got this online. You can see that it's just a triangle, pyramid shaped, cut out and imprint. The back of this upper punch is smoothed out. It isn't sharp. So that way, when it comes down and squishes the picket, it cuts it on the edges, so it's going to squish and cut it into a triangle shape, but it just squishes it but doesn't cut it on the back end. The bottom of the spike would just be cut instead of just squished, while this all gets cut. Of course, there's many different ways to cut the spike of a picket as far as which machine you're using, which hydraulic press, but it's all just simply based. You need a die, you need a press, and you need some kind of hydraulic machine to squish the square tubing in the end and then cut it into a spike. So check this out, watch. You see how there's a stop? So this is a very rigged way to do this. I'm not in charge of this jig, but basically all you need is a backstop, and then ideally you'd have some kind of rollers and or guide to make sure that you're going into this punch straight, so that it's perpendicular to the punch. So that's how you spike all your tips. Ideally, you'd have a backstop we do have a backstop. It's a piece of wood. It should be a piece of metal, but you have a backstop so that all of them are the same, and then you'd have guides to make sure it's going in straight when you punch out, and then they're all going to be identical. Once we have cut pickets on the bandsaw, which I showed earlier, and once we spike the pickets, now what do? Well, we have a panel jig, and this is what I'm going to bring you over here. I had laying around the shop this squared up angle iron frame, so it was an easy way for me to get something that was square and just cut notches in it. Since these are 3/4 square tubings, we're going to do 3/4 notches in these. Make sure that you're measuring from the end on both ends on the same side so that they're parallel to each other and you can get your pickets running straight. But anyway, so that's all the way across. Tack this onto our existing table. And then you're going to put a backstop up here that's parallel to this edge so that we're getting a square panel. So all of these pickets are going to bump up against this stop so that you have a level top edge. And then you just have to measure where your cross sections are going to go. So you're just going to measure where your cross sections are going to go. Decide where your rails are going to go next. And on this particular panel we're manufacturing, there's going to be 3 rails. So the top rail has to be 6 feet up from the cement curb according to code. So we had to minus the 4-inch gap that's going to be on top of the brick ledge that we're installing this fence on, and then measure up from there. So it came out to like 68 inches. How do we do that? How do we set the rails where we want them? We're just going to cut out strips of angle iron into 1-inch or 2-inch sections, and we're going to get the rail exactly where we want it. We're going to tack it, and then we're going to butt these up against it, and we're going to tack it where we want the rail to be. So we first get a rail where we want it to be, and then we bump up these angles against it and tack it with the welder to the jig table. And then that way we can make all the panels exactly the same once we get that first measured out, offed and jigged panel. So just to further explain, you're going to slip these in like this. That's what I did all along here. And then you're going to take the top rail and you're going to slide it up against this and side stop to make sure that all of them are going to be the same way. Side stop, and then this one's already in position. And slide it up, stop, and then you just weld. You're going to weld the rails to the pickets all the way along on the top edges, because when it rains, rust happens in any crevices the rain can get into. So by doing that, you're negating that from happening. No rust on your top rail.